So, David Hume decapitated scientific morality, right? His guillotine silenced the so-called science of right and wrong once and for all, yes? Because you simply can't get an ought from an is. I mean, that's just common knowledge, isn't it? Well, no. Because regardless of how common it is, the assertion that there's an unbridgeable chasm between science and morality is, in fact, false. Hume's guillotine fails to defeat the claim that science has a rightful voice in how we ought to behave. Indeed, I'd go so far as to suggest that Hume was, and would be proud to be, father to some of the most promising contemporary research in the science of morality, and that he was not so foolish as to have inadvertently killed his newborns. To see how the anti-naturalists have got Hume wrong, it pays, not surprisingly, to actually read Hume. In every system of morality which I have hitherto met with, I have always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary ways of reasoning, and establishes the being of a god or makes observations concerning human affairs, when all of a sudden I'm surprised to find that instead of the usual copulations of propositions, is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. This change is imperceptible, but is however of the last consequence, for as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it is necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time that a reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable, how this new relation can be a deduction from others which are entirely different from it. But as authors do not commonly use this precaution, I shall presume to recommend it to the readers, and am persuaded that this small attention would subvert all the vulgar systems of morality, and let us see that the distinction of vice and virtue is not founded merely on the relations of objects, nor is perceived by reason. Hume's criticism here rests on 2 points. Firstly, the principle that a valid argument can express nothing in its conclusion that's not expressed in its premises. And secondly, that the existential verb is expresses something distinct from the normative verb ought. Thus one cannot, given these 2 points, deduce statements about what ought to be from statements about what is. It is from this conclusion that anti-naturalists are oft found forging hatchets, scalding blades with which to do violence against meta-ethical naturalism, especially when dread science threatens to voice ideologically or theologically uncomfortable truths. But this moralistic and circumstantial enterprise fails. It fails because, as did those vulgar moral rationalists to whom Hume addressed his original criticism, it assumes that moral reasoning is exhausted by deduction from first principles, that all that's done, and that all that needs to be done, in order to know right action, is to follow the apodictic light of reason, with a capital R. Not only is this factually incorrect, as evidenced by present scientific and historical research into moral cognition, but ironic, as no other philosopher did more to demonstrate the insufficiency of reason for right than Hume. Consequently, even though it's true that nothing can pop up in the conclusion of an argument that's not in its premises, the premises of our best moral reasoning are not, and ought not be, exclusively existential statements derived from pure reason. Therefore, given the inapplicability of its first point in this instance, Hume's guillotine does not, as anti-naturalists claim, silence science on morality. As to what Hume's attitude would have been to scientific moral research, well, one need not, I think, go much further than the subtitle of his treatise. So perhaps experimental research into morality as a feature of human psychology, and in order to help inform and improve our moral reasoning, is not a snub to the great man as much as the fulfilment of his legacy. Next time, as if this video weren't controversial enough, I'll argue that more is less. Thank you for listening,